Hello and welcome back to Needle Lace Made Easy. Michael Dennis here again. In this video I will show you how to fill the last petal. The stitch we are going to use for this is Williamson Stitch. It's very dark today, so I'm having to use a video light which may change the colour slightly, but you should still be able to see what's going on. This area we're going to fill with Williamson stitch. Up until now the stitches that you've used have all consisted of a single row of stitches, each row being the same. With Williamson stitch it takes 3 rows of stitches to make up the stitch. Now that may seem complicated, but all will be revealed as we work through on this video. The first thing we need to consider is this top shape here, which looks very similar to the last shape we had in as much as we got this big dip. But the difference here is that if we run a needle up from the base in a parallel motion, we'll see that on the right hand side there's very little space to get a row of stitches in, whereas on the left hand side there's quite a big space. We could possibly get 2 rows of stitches in there, but we won't know that until we've completed our first row of stitches. After that then we should be able to get a row of stitches going right across the space. I run my thread up through the counting stitches on the side, made my first row of stitches and laid the cord back. And it's quite clear that I can get another row of stitches in there before working completely across the row. I've worked my second row, laying the cord back, and now working on the third row, and got to the point where I run out of loops of stitches from the row above. So now we will work into the coordinate. So all these stitches now will be through the coordinate. Until you get to here. We won't be able to take this bit in because that will be part of the next row. So work along here till you get to there, then take your filling thread out through the side. That's completed now, enough stitches to make a foundation row for working this Williamson stitch. So the first row of Williamson stitch is just a straight row of buttonhole stitches, all close together, no gaps. With this next row of the Williamson stitch, we've got to work back across the row, which we haven't had to do before. We've always worked from left to right, taken the cord across and worked the next row left to right. It takes a bit of getting used to working this stitch. In effect, it's working a buttonhole stitch backwards. You have to lay the cord across the space in the direction that you're making the stitch. The Williamson stitch, we need to miss the first 2 loops and make a buttonhole stitch into the 3rd loop. So miss 1, 2, and go into the 3rd loop. Go over the thread and pull it up. Again, watch it. If you pull it this way first, that will form your stitch, and then pulling it this way, we'll see how tight this loop is. Doesn't want to be too tight, and the stitch doesn't want to be too tight either. So that's about right. And then we need to count then 1, 2, and go into the 3rd loop. Over the thread, pull it up. Miss 2 stitches, so it's 1, 2, into the 3rd loop. Over that thread, pull it out. Miss 2 stitches, 1, 2, and into the third loop, over the thread and pull it up, and just continue like that across the row. I've now completed the row and managed to get 1 stitch into the last loop. If you end up with only 2 loops to spare, doesn't matter, just run your thread under the side coordinate as usual. Now the next row of the Williamson stitch requires us to work 3 normal buttonhole stitches into each of these loops. There's 1, 2, 3. Then move on to the next loop. One, 2, 3. Again, don't pull them too tight. Now continue like that across the row. Now this row of stitches has brought us down to this line here now. So I'm going to work as many buttonhole stitches in there as I can down to this point here, just to finish the row off. Probably only be 2 or 3 stitches. Only 2. So go out through the side as normal. Make a double loop. Now this time we're going to lay the thread back across the space as you've done in the past. And double loop it on the other side. Your next row of stitches will be a row of ordinary buttonhole stitches going into every loop along the row. I've now completed that row of stitches working into the loops of those groups of 3 stitches above, which gives us back our basic row of buttonhole stitches. So the next row now will be working backwards, missing 2 loops, working into the next loop, miss 2, work it, miss 2, work it, and so on across the space, and then come back this way, working 3 loops into each of the larger loops that you left this way. To get back to here, lay a cord back and do this row again. So it's basically 3 rows of stitches to make up the pattern. You can see a pattern starting to form. We've got these gaps along here, and then you've got these smaller gaps between each group of 3 stitches, and then a line of perfectly formed stitches. So carry on working down the shape. It won't be until you've done 2 or 3 sequences of these 3 rows that you'll really see the pattern then as it should be. I've just worked my row backwards, and I just thought I'd show you that on the end here I've got a loop, but it's not big enough to put 3 stitches in, but you would need to put a stitch in there, otherwise you'll end up with a big hole in the side here. I don't think you'll get two in that little space. It looks to me as though that length is about a third of the length of one of these loops, so one stitch in there, and then carry on with 3 stitches in that one and 3 in that one, and so on across the space. I've now finished filling this area with the Williamson stitch, and I can't get any more rows now in there because this row is sitting on top of the circle. As luck would have it, the next row is the row where we lay the cord back, so I can lay the cord back to here and finish off this area with corded single Brussels, the same as we did with the first area we did. So we loop under the circle and then whip down these stitches onto the circle. So pick up each loop of each stitch and just whip it down to the coordinate on the top of the circle. Continue like that round to this stitch here, and then lay the cord across here, put a row of stitches coming back that way, and whip along then the top of the circle and finish these stitches here. You may have to put 2 rows in on this side. I think you get away with 1 row on this side. So it's finishing exactly the same as you did when you did the corded single Brussels. I've now finished that last row. I only had to put 2 stitches in on this side and 3 on this side. And I finished by taking the thread under the coordinate here twice, and then fed the thread up under these carroting stitches to finish off. Now I just need to snip that off. And that is all of the filling stitches now completed. So that's how that should look. Our next step now is to do the top stitching all the way around the outside and then release it from the pad. We'll do that on the next video.